The yellow envelope appeared on my doorstep on the coldest morning of January, and I knew before opening it that my life in Cascade Heights, Vermont, was about to get significantly more complicated. I'm Quinton Keller, and I've lived in this supposedly upscale neighborhood for 3 years now. The house itself is beautiful, a two-story colonial with dark blue siding and white trim that I fell in love with the moment I saw it. What I didn't fall in love with was the Cascade Heights Homeowners Association, run by a woman whose very name makes my blood pressure spike, Sharon Pemberton. 52 years old, bleached blonde hair styled in that "I want to speak to the manager" cut, and a personality that could curdle milk at 20 paces. She's the president of the HOA, a position she's held for 7 years through a combination of intimidation and the fact that nobody else wants to deal with the headache. I opened the envelope with cold fingers, my breath visible in the morning air. Inside was a printed notice on official HOA letterhead, complete with the ridiculous logo featuring a mountain and a house that someone probably paid $5,000 to design. Violation notice, it read in bold letters. Property, 847 Maple Ridge Drive. Violation, excessive ice accumulation on roof structure creating aesthetic concerns and potential safety hazard to HOA common areas. Fine, $500. Additional fines of $100 per day will accrue until violation is remedied. You have 48 hours to correct this issue. I stared at the paper, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. They were fining me $500 because snow had melted and refrozen on my roof, not because it was dangerous to my property, not because it was causing damage to my house, but because it was an aesthetic concern and might, theoretically, slide off onto the sidewalk below, the sidewalk that was public property and not part of my lot. I looked up at my roof, squinting against the bright winter sun reflecting off the ice. Yes, there was ice. There had been a freak thaw 2 days ago, followed by temperatures dropping back to 15 degrees overnight. Every house on the street had ice on their roofs. Mine was perhaps a bit more pronounced because my roof faces south and gets more sun exposure, causing more melting and refreezing. But $500, and $100 per day after that. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office, which was really just Sharon's home office in her house 4 streets over. She answered on the 3rd ring. Cascade Heights HOA, Sharon speaking. Sharon, this is Quinton Keller at 847 Maple Ridge. I just got a violation notice about ice on my roof. Yes, Mr. Keller. The board conducted a drive-through inspection yesterday and noted several violations. Yours was particularly egregious. Egregious, it's ice, from the weather. That happened naturally. The HOA covenants clearly state that homeowners are responsible for maintaining their properties in a manner that upholds the aesthetic standards of the community. Ice buildup is unsightly and reflects poorly on all of us. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Sharon, every house has ice on their roofs right now. It's winter in Vermont. Not every house has the excessive accumulation that yours does. Additionally, our insurance consultant has indicated that ice sliding from roofs onto common walkways presents a liability issue. The sidewalk isn't my property, but your ice is your responsibility. Her voice had that smug tone that I'd come to recognize over the years. This wasn't about safety or aesthetics. This was about power. Fine, I'll address it. I hung up before she could respond. The thing is, removing ice from a roof isn't simple or cheap. You can't just climb up there and start hacking at it with an ice pick. That's a great way to damage your shingles and potentially kill yourself falling off a slippery roof. Professional ice removal services charge anywhere from $300 to $800, depending on the size of the house. So I'd be out of pocket at least $300 for professional removal, or $500 if I just paid the fine and let nature take its course when the weather warmed up. Either way, the HOA won. Except I wasn't going to let them win that easily. I spent the rest of that day researching Vermont HOA laws, property rights, and liability statutes. What I discovered was interesting. While HOAs in Vermont have broad authority to enforce aesthetic standards, they can't enforce regulations that are impossible to comply with or that violate state law. Moreover, the Vermont Supreme Court had ruled in 2018 that HOAs couldn't hold homeowners liable for naturally occurring weather conditions unless there was clear negligence involved. Ice forming on a roof during a Vermont winter was about as naturally occurring as you could get. I drafted a response letter citing the relevant case law and delivered it to Sharon's mailbox that evening. I kept a copy for my records and took photos of every house on my street, documenting that they all had ice accumulation. 2 days later, I received another letter. The fine had increased to $700, and they'd added a new violation for improper mailbox placement. My mailbox hadn't moved in 3 years, but apparently it was now 1 inch too far forward according to their measurements. This was war. I called my neighbor, Derek Matthews, who'd had his own battles with Sharon over the years. He answered on the first ring. "Let me guess," he said. "Sharon, how'd you know? She hit 3 houses on our street with violation notices this week." Mine was for having my trash cans visible from the street more than 12 hours before pickup. I put them out at 7 p.m. the night before a 6 a.m. pickup. "That's insane." "That's Sharon. What'd she get you for?" "Ice on my roof. $500 fine, now up to $700. Derek whistled. "That's bold even for her. You know why she's on a rampage, right?" "No idea." "Her daughter's wedding got called off last month. Groom caught her cheating with his cousin. Sharon's been taking it out on everyone since." "That's not my problem." "No, but it explains the attitude." "Look, Quinton, my advice. Pay the fine and move on. Fighting with Sharon is like wrestling a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it. I'm not paying $700 for ice that will melt in a few weeks anyway. Then you better lawyer up because she won't back down." I didn't want to spend thousands on a lawyer to fight a $700 fine, but the principle of it gnawed at me. I'd followed every rule, paid my HOA dues on time, kept my property immaculate. And now I was being extorted over frozen water. That night, temperatures rose slightly, and I heard it, the distinctive sound of ice beginning to shift on my roof. I went outside with a flashlight and examined the situation. The ice had started to separate from the shingles, held in place only by its own weight and the cold. When the next warm day came, it was going to slide right off, and that's when the idea hit me. Sharon parked her silver Mercedes SUV on the street directly below where my roof overhang extended. She did this because she was always visiting Mrs. Henderson 3 houses down, bringing her those terrible sugar-free cookies she made and gossiping for hours. The vehicle was there almost every afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. The forecast showed temperatures climbing to 40 degrees the following afternoon. I'm not proud of what I decided to do next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. Sometimes you have to let nature take its course. And if nature decided that a large sheet of ice should slide off my roof at precisely the moment it would land on a certain annoying HOA president's vehicle, well, that was just unfortunate timing. The next morning, I took detailed photos and videos of my roof, documenting the ice situation. I then sent an email to the HOA board, copying all 5 members including Sharon. "Dear board members," I wrote, I am in receipt of the violation notice regarding ice accumulation on my roof. Please be advised that ice formation during Vermont winters is a naturally occurring phenomenon beyond homeowner control. As per Vermont's Supreme Court ruling in Henderson v. Mountain View HOA 2018, homeowners cannot be held liable for natural weather conditions absent clear negligence. Additionally, I note that similar ice accumulation exists on approximately 15 other properties within Cascade Heights, yet I appear to be the only homeowner being fined. This constitutes selective enforcement, which is prohibited under Vermont HOA statutes. I am formally disputing this fine and request an immediate board hearing. Furthermore, please be advised that the ice is beginning to separate from the roof structure and may slide off at any time. Anyone parking in the vicinity does so at their own risk. Regards, Quinton Keller. The last part was key. I had provided clear warning that the ice might fall. What happened next would be on them. I sent the email at 9 a.m. By 10 a.m., I had an angry voicemail from Sharon. Mr. Keller, this is completely unacceptable. You do not dictate terms to this board. The fine stands, and your veiled threats about ice falling on vehicles are noted. Remove the ice immediately or face further penalties. Perfect. She'd acknowledged receiving my warning and had done nothing to prevent people from parking in the danger zone. At 1 p.m., the sun was shining brightly, and the temperature had reached 38 degrees. I could see the ice on my roof glistening with meltwater. At 1:45, Sharon's Mercedes pulled up to its usual spot directly in the fall zone. I was in my home office, which has a perfect view of the street. I watched Sharon get out of her car, clutching one of her Tupperware containers full of cookies. She glanced at my house with obvious disdain before marching toward Mrs. Henderson's place. At 2:17 p.m. I heard it. A creaking, groaning sound as several square feet of ice separated from my roof. Then a thunderous crash as it slid off the overhang and dropped 15 feet onto the silver Mercedes below. The ice sheet, probably 6 feet by 8 feet and 2 inches thick, hit the roof of the SUV with the force of a small avalanche. The windshield spiderwebbed instantly. The roof crumpled inward. The hood buckled from ice sliding forward. Car alarms shrieked into the quiet afternoon. I grabbed my phone and started recording from my window. This was documentation, after all. Sharon came running out of Mrs. Henderson's house, her face a mask of horror and rage. She stood in the street, staring at her demolished vehicle, mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" she shrieked. She spun toward my house. Quinton Keller, you did this on purpose." I opened my window. "I sent an email this morning warning that the ice might fall. You parked there anyway. You knew, and you let this happen." I warned everyone. "It's not my fault you ignored a clear safety notice." Other neighbors had started coming out, drawn by the commotion and the car alarm. Derek gave me a subtle thumbs up from his driveway. Sharon was on her phone now, calling the police. "Yes, I need an officer at 847 Maple Ridge Drive. My vehicle has been destroyed. This is vandalism, willful destruction of property." I closed my window and waited. The police arrived within 15 minutes, a single cruiser with Officer Morrison, whom I recognized from a neighborhood watch meeting last year. I went outside before he could knock on my door. "Officer Morrison," I said, extending my hand. "Mr. Keller, can you tell me what happened here?" Sharon rushed over before I could respond. "He did this deliberately. He knew the ice would fall and he let it happen. Look at my car." Officer Morrison examined the vehicle, then looked up at my roof, then at the ice and debris on the ground. "Madam, it appears ice fell from the roof." "Exactly. He knew it would and he didn't remove it." Is there any law requiring homeowners to remove ice from their roofs? Morrison asked. The HOA requires it, but is there a municipal law? Sharon sputtered. Well, no, but the HOA covenants, those are civil matters, madam. From what I can see, this is an unfortunate accident caused by weather conditions. I pulled out my phone. Officer, I sent an email to the entire HOA board at 9 a.m. this morning, warning them that the ice was unstable and might fall. I specifically noted that anyone parking in the area did so at their own risk. Miss Pemberton acknowledged receipt of that email and told me, and I quote, "My veiled threats about ice falling on vehicles were noted. She chose to park here anyway." Morrison looked at Sharon with raised eyebrows. "Is that accurate, madam?" Sharon's face had gone red. "He could have prevented this. He could have removed the ice. You received advance warning of a potential hazard and chose to ignore it," Morrison said. "That's not vandalism, madam. That's poor judgment. You'll need to file a claim with your insurance company. This is ridiculous. He's getting away with destroying my car." "Madam, ice fell from a roof. It happens every winter. I'm not seeing any criminal activity here." Morrison turned to me. "Mr. Keller, I'd recommend getting that remaining ice removed to prevent any further incidents." "Already scheduled a professional service for tomorrow," I lied smoothly. "I'd actually call them as soon as the officer left." Morrison nodded and returned to his cruiser. Sharon stood in the street, shaking with rage, staring at her crushed Mercedes. "You haven't heard the last of this," she hissed at me. "The board will be taking action." "Looking forward to it," I replied calmly. That evening, my phone blew up with texts and calls from neighbors. Most were congratulatory, though a few expressed concern that I'd made an enemy of Sharon. As if I hadn't already been on her bad side, Derek came over with 2 beers. We sat on my porch in the cold evening air, watching the tow truck haul away Sharon's destroyed Mercedes. "You're either the bravest man I know or the dumbest," Derek said, handing me a beer. "Probably a bit of both. She's going to make your life hell. She was already doing that. At least now I got something out of it. Fair point." He clinked his bottle against mine. "To strategic ice placement," I laughed despite myself, "to natural consequences." The next morning, I received an email from the HOA board calling an emergency meeting to discuss the incident at 847 Maple Ridge Drive and the appropriate response. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the community center. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Richard Stiles, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Burlington, about 40 minutes from Cascade Heights. "So let me get this straight," Richard said after I'd explained the situation. "They fined you for ice on your roof. You warned them it might fall. They ignored the warning, and then the ice fell on the HOA president's car. That's accurate. And you have documentation of the warning, email with read receipts, plus her voicemail response acknowledging receipt." Richard laughed, actually laughed. "Mr. Keller, this is the most straightforward case I've seen in months. They have no legal ground to stand on. In fact, if they try to fine you further or take action against you, we could potentially sue for harassment. I want to avoid that if possible." "Understandable. Let's attend this meeting and see what they propose. If they're reasonable, we can resolve this quietly. If not, we have options." Tuesday arrived with fresh snow falling, covering the evidence of the ice incident. I arrived at the community center at 6:50 p.m. Richard met me in the parking lot, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The community center was a modest building with a meeting room that held about 40 people. Tonight, it was nearly full. Apparently, word had spread about the meeting, and people were curious. Sharon sat at the head table with the other 4 board members. Tom Richards, a retired accountant, Patricia Chen, who worked in real estate, Marcus Webb, a software engineer, and Jennifer Walsh, a stay-at-home mom who seemed perpetually terrified of Sharon. Sharon's face went pale when she saw me walk in with Richard. "You brought a lawyer to an HOA meeting," she said, her voice sharp. "Seemed prudent, given the circumstances," I replied. Richard and I sat in the front row. The room buzzed with conversation until Sharon banged her gavel at 7 p.m. sharp. This emergency meeting of the Cascade Heights HOA is now in session. We're here to discuss the incident that occurred on January 24th, involving property damage to my vehicle caused by negligence on the part of Mr. Quinton Keller of 847 Maple Ridge Drive. Richard raised his hand. "Point of order. May I speak?" Sharon looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. "And you are Richard Stiles, attorney representing Mr. Keller. Before we proceed, I need to clarify that we're here to discuss an accident caused by naturally occurring weather conditions, not negligence. The characterization of this incident as negligence is inaccurate and potentially libelous. Mr. Stiles, this is an HOA meeting, not a courtroom. Nevertheless, accuracy in these proceedings is important, particularly if any decisions made here are later challenged in actual court." Tom Richards, the retired accountant, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should hear from both sides before making any determinations." Sharon shot him a look but nodded. "Fine. Mr. Keller, would you like to explain why you failed to remove ice from your roof despite receiving a violation notice?" I stood up. "I received a violation notice demanding I remove naturally occurring ice accumulation at my own expense, threatening fines that exceeded the cost of professional removal. I researched Vermont law and found that HOAs cannot enforce regulations regarding natural weather conditions, absent clear negligence. I also noted that approximately 15 other homes in this community had similar ice accumulation, yet I was the only one fined. That's selective enforcement, which violates Vermont HOA statutes. When I realized the ice was becoming unstable, I sent a clear warning to the entire board that it might fall, and that anyone parking nearby did so at their own risk. Miss Pemberton acknowledged that warning and chose to park in the danger zone anyway. The subsequent accident was unfortunate, but not the result of negligence on my part. Patricia Chen spoke up. "Sharon, did you receive that warning email?" Sharon's jaw tightened. "I received an email, yes, but it was clearly a threat disguised as a warning." Richard stood. "May I see the original violation notice sent to Mr. Keller?" Sharon reluctantly produced a copy. Richard examined it, then addressed the board. "This notice threatens fines totaling $700 for what it describes as an aesthetic concern. However, it provides no reasonable timeline for compliance, doesn't acknowledge that professional ice removal requires specific weather conditions to be safely performed, and singles out Mr. Keller despite similar conditions existing on multiple properties. This is textbook selective enforcement. Furthermore, by ignoring Mr. Keller's legitimate safety warning, Miss Pemberton assumed the risk of parking in an area she knew to be potentially hazardous." Marcus Webb, the software engineer, leaned forward. "Sharon, why was Quinton the only one fined when other houses have ice too?" "His was the most severe." "That's subjective," Marcus replied. "I drive past his house every day. It didn't look significantly different from mine or a dozen others." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Jennifer Walsh timidly raised her hand. "Maybe we should just drop the whole thing. It was an accident, right?" "Absolutely not," Sharon snapped. Mr. Keller's negligence caused thousands of dollars in damage to my vehicle. The association needs to hold him accountable." "Actually," Richard said smoothly, "if the association attempts to hold Mr. Keller financially responsible for an accident that occurred after he provided clear warning, we would consider that actionable harassment. We would then file suit not just against the association, but against individual board members for damages and legal fees. Given the documentation we have, I'm confident we would prevail." The room went silent. Tom Richards picked up his copy of the HOA bylaws and flipped through them. After a moment, he set the book down. "Sharon, I think we need to cut our losses here. Quinton wasn't negligent. He warned us. You parked there anyway. This is between you and your insurance company, not HOA business." "Tom, you cannot be serious." "I am serious. If we pursue this and get sued, the association's insurance premiums will skyrocket. Plus, we'll lose. I may not be a lawyer, but even I can see we don't have a case." Patricia Chen nodded. "I agree with Tom. Motion to dismiss all fines against Mr. Keller and close this matter." "Second," Marcus said immediately. "We need to vote," Sharon said through clenched teeth. "All in favor?" Tom asked. Patricia, Marcus, and Tom raised their hands. Jennifer looked between them and Sharon, then slowly raised her hand as well. "Motion carries 4-1, Tom announced. "All fines against Mr. Keller are rescinded. This matter is closed." Sharon stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine, but don't expect me to forget this." She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the community center. The room erupted in conversation. Several neighbors came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Derek was grinning from ear to ear. "Dude, that was amazing," he said. "Did you see her face?" "Hard to miss," I replied. Richard packed up his briefcase. "Well, that went better than expected. You won't be hearing from them about this again. If you do, call me immediately. What do I owe you for tonight? Consider it pro bono. That was the most entertaining HOA meeting I've attended in years. Worth every minute." I drove home feeling victorious but also slightly uneasy. I knew Sharon well enough to know she wouldn't let this go. She might have lost this battle, but in her mind, the war was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, life returned to relative normalcy. I hired a professional service to remove the remaining ice from my roof, more to protect myself from future accusations than because I thought it was necessary. The weather warmed up, the snow melted, and spring started showing its first tentative signs. Then the letters started. First, it was a violation notice for having unapproved exterior light fixtures. The fixtures in question were the same ones that had been on my house when I bought it 3 years ago, the same ones that had passed the initial HOA inspection when I moved in. Then came a notice about my lawn being uneven in appearance. This in early March when half of Vermont was still covered in snow. Then one about my mailbox post being faded and requiring repainting. It had been painted 6 months ago. I saved every notice and forwarded them to Richard. After the 5th notice in 3 weeks, he called me. "This is harassment, plain and simple," he said. "We need to act on this. What do you recommend?" "File a formal complaint with the board alleging that Miss Pemberton is abusing her position to harass you in retaliation for the incident with her vehicle. Document everything. If it continues, we file suit." I drafted the complaint that evening and delivered copies to all 5 board members via certified mail. In the complaint, I detailed every spurious violation notice, pointed out that none of my neighbors had received similar notices for identical conditions, and requested that Sharon be removed from any decision-making regarding my property. 2 days later, Tom Richards called me. "Quinton, it's Tom from the board. Listen, We've received your complaint, and honestly, several of us have been concerned about Sharon's behavior. She's been fixated on your property to an unhealthy degree. I appreciate you acknowledging that. The problem is, removing a board president requires a vote of the full membership, which means a special election. That's a whole complicated process. I understand, but I can't keep dealing with these frivolous violations. I have a suggestion. What if we pass a board resolution requiring that all violation notices be reviewed and approved by at least 2 board members before being sent out? That way, Sharon can't unilaterally target you. That could work. I'll bring it up at our next meeting. In the meantime, just ignore any notices that come from Sharon alone. If she has a legitimate concern, it'll be brought to the full board. I agreed to Tom's suggestion, and the following week, the board passed his resolution by a 4-to-1 vote. Sharon was the lone dissenting vote, naturally. The harassment stopped, but Sharon made her displeasure known in other ways. She glared at me whenever our paths crossed. She made snide comments about me at board meetings, which I started attending regularly just to keep an eye on things. She tried to rally other homeowners against me, painting me as a troublemaker who didn't respect community standards. Most people saw through her act. After living under Sharon's iron-fisted rule for years, many neighbors were quietly thrilled that someone had finally stood up to her. But a few people bought into her narrative. Mrs. Henderson, Sharon's elderly friend, stopped waving when I drove past. The Thorntons, a young couple at the end of my street, started giving me suspicious looks. It was uncomfortable but manageable. Then, in mid-April, things escalated. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find my mailbox destroyed. Not just knocked over, but completely demolished. The post was snapped off at the base, and the mailbox itself was dented and crushed as if someone had taken a baseball bat to it. I called the police and filed a report. Officer Morrison came out to take photos and statements. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have suspicions, but no proof." "The HOA president you've been having issues with. She's the most obvious candidate, but I can't prove it," Morrison nodded. "We'll keep an eye out. You might want to consider installing a security camera." I'd been thinking about cameras for weeks, but had hesitated because I didn't want to seem paranoid. Now it seemed like a necessity. That evening, I ordered a comprehensive security system with cameras covering my front yard, driveway, and the street. It arrived 2 days later, and I spent a Saturday installing it. The cameras proved their worth within a week. On Thursday night around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security system. I opened the app and watched live footage of someone spray painting my front door. The figure was wearing dark clothes and a hood, but the infrared camera captured enough detail to see it was a woman, average height, with blonde hair visible at the edges of the hood. I immediately called 911, then saved the video footage to my cloud storage. Officer Morrison arrived within 10 minutes, but by then the vandal had fled. My front door was covered in bright red spray paint, with the words "troublemaker" and "you don't belong here" scrawled across it. "I have video," I told Morrison, pulling up the footage on my phone. He watched it carefully. "Can't see her face clearly enough for a positive ID, but we can work with this. I'll need you to send me that footage." "Already done." Morrison looked at the paint on my door. "Mr. Keller, I'm going to be straight with you. This is escalating. First the mailbox, now vandalism with threatening messages. Whoever's doing this is getting bolder. I know who it is. Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But my cameras are running 24/7 now. If she comes back, I'll get a clear shot of her face." Morrison handed me his card. "Call me directly if anything else happens. Day or night. This has gone beyond HOA disputes into criminal activity." I spent the next day cleaning spray paint off my door, which required industrial paint stripper, and left the door looking terrible. I'd need to repaint it, another expense courtesy of Sharon's vendetta, but I had a plan now. Sharon's pattern was clear. She acted impulsively, driven by emotion rather than logic. She would make a mistake eventually, and when she did, I'd be ready. The weekend passed without incident. I reviewed my camera footage obsessively, watching for any suspicious activity. Neighbors walked their dogs, cars drove past, nothing unusual. Monday night, I was in bed when my phone buzzed again. Another motion alert, this time at 1:30 a.m. I opened the app and felt my heart rate spike. Someone was crouching near my front wheel well, doing something to my car. The person was wearing the same dark hoodie as before, but this time they'd made a mistake. They were positioned directly under my porch light sensor, which had activated when they approached, providing clear illumination. I zoomed in on the video feed and clearly saw Sharon Pemberton's face as she unscrewed the valve stem caps from my tires. She had a small tool in her hand, and as I watched, she pressed it against the valve stem, releasing air with a quiet hiss. I grabbed my phone and called 911, keeping my voice low. "Someone's actively vandalizing my vehicle right now. I have video footage. She's still here. Stay inside," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers are on their way." I watched through the camera feed as Sharon moved to my second tire. She was so focused on her task that she didn't notice the police cruiser that pulled up silently at the end of my street with its lights off. Officer Morrison and another officer I didn't recognize approached on foot. They were almost on top of Sharon before she realized they were there. "Freeze! Police!" Morrison shouted. Sharon screamed and tried to run, but the second officer caught her arm. She struggled, shouting something I couldn't hear through the camera audio. I went downstairs and opened my front door, my phone still recording everything. Sharon was in handcuffs, her face a mask of rage and tears. "This is a mistake. I wasn't doing anything." "Madam, we observed you tampering with this vehicle's tires," Morrison said calmly. "Mr. Keller, are these your tires she was deflating?" "Yes, officer, and I have clear video footage from multiple angles." "I want to see it," Sharon snapped. "This is entrapment or something." "That's not what entrapment means," Morrison replied. He looked at me. "Can you send me that footage?" "Already sharing it." I worked my phone, sending the video files to Morrison's email. "I also have footage from last Thursday showing what appears to be Miss Pemberton spray painting my door, and I reported my mailbox being destroyed 2 weeks ago." The second officer was reading Sharon her Miranda rights. She kept interrupting, insisting this was all a misunderstanding, that I had orchestrated everything to frame her. "Mr. Keller," Morrison said, "we're going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement and provide all your video evidence." "Of course." They loaded Sharon into the back of the cruiser. She was still shouting about wrongful arrest and harassment as they drove away. Lights in neighboring houses had come on. Several people stood in their doorways or at their windows, watching the scene unfold. Derek jogged over in his bathrobe. "Please tell me I just saw what I think I saw." Sharon was deflating my tires. The police caught her red-handed. "Holy crap," Derek started laughing. "Holy crap, this is incredible. She's actually going to jail. Probably just overnight until her arraignment. Still, the mighty have fallen." I didn't feel triumphant. Mostly, I felt tired. This whole situation had spiraled so far beyond anything I could have imagined when I first received that violation notice about ice on my roof. The next morning, I went to the police station and spent 2 hours giving my statement and providing video evidence. Morrison reviewed everything carefully. "This is clear-cut vandalism and criminal mischief." he said. The spray painting, the mailbox destruction, and now the tire tampering. Miss Pemberton is looking at multiple misdemeanor charges. Depending on how the DA's office wants to handle it, possibly more. I just want it to stop. It will. She'll have a restraining order as part of her bail conditions, minimum. She won't be allowed to contact you or come within 100 feet of your property. Sharon was arraigned that afternoon. I wasn't present, but Tom Richards called me with updates. She'd been released on bail with the restraining order in place. Her lawyer was arguing for a plea deal, claiming she'd been under extreme stress due to personal issues and had acted irrationally. The board is meeting tonight, Tom said. Emergency session to discuss Sharon's position. Given that she's been arrested for harassing a homeowner, we need to take action. What kind of action? At minimum, suspension from the board. Likely, we'll call for a vote to remove her entirely. This has become a liability issue for the entire association. That evening's board meeting was packed. Every homeowner in Cascade Heights seemed to have shown up, eager to witness Sharon's downfall. I attended with Richard Stiles, just in case. Sharon was required to stay at least 100 feet from me, which meant she couldn't enter the community center while I was there. Her lawyer attended in her place, reading a prepared statement. Miss Pemberton deeply regrets her recent actions, the lawyer read in a monotone voice. She has been under severe personal stress and recognizes that she allowed her emotions to override her judgment. She voluntarily resigns from her position as HOA president and from the board of directors, effective immediately. She requests privacy during this difficult time and hopes the community can move forward from this unfortunate situation. Tom Richards accepted the resignation on behalf of the board, then addressed the room. Given the circumstances, I'll be serving as interim president until we can hold proper elections next month. Our first priority is rebuilding trust within this community and ensuring that all homeowners are treated fairly and equitably. Applause broke out. People were actually clapping. Patricia Chen spoke up. I'd also like to propose that we review all violation notices issued in the past 6 months and rescind any that appear to have been issued in bad faith or as selective enforcement. Seconded, Marcus said immediately. The motion passed unanimously. After the meeting, a parade of neighbors approached me. Some apologized for not standing up to Sharon sooner. Others thanked me for finally putting an end to her reign of terror. Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, gave me a sad smile. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Sharon's been my friend for years, but what she did to you was wrong. I should have said something." "It's okay, Mrs. Henderson." "No, it's not. But thank you for being gracious." Over the following weeks, I settled into a new normal. My front door got repainted, this time in a shade I actually preferred. I installed a new mailbox with a more robust post. My security cameras stayed active, though the most exciting thing they captured was a raccoon knocking over my trash can. Sharon's criminal case moved through the system. In late May, she accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, restitution for the damages she'd caused, and mandatory anger management counseling. She'd avoided jail time but had a criminal record now. I never saw her around the neighborhood again. According to Derek, she'd listed her house for sale and moved in with her daughter in Massachusetts. The new owners, a nice young couple with a golden retriever, seemed much more pleasant. The HOA held elections in June. Tom Richards won the presidency by a landslide. His platform was simple: common sense enforcement, transparent decision-making, and treating homeowners like adults rather than criminals. Under Tom's leadership, the association revised its bylaws to prevent another Sharon situation. New rules required multiple board members to approve violation notices, established an appeals process for disputed fines, and limited the president's unilateral authority. My life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. I paid my HOA dues, kept my property maintained, and generally stayed out of association politics. One afternoon in July, I was working in my yard when Derek came over with 2 beers, a callback to that evening months ago when we'd watched Sharon's Mercedes get towed away. "Figured you could use one of these," he said, offering me a bottle, always. I took the beer and we sat on my porch steps. "You know," Derek said after a long silence, "when you first moved here, I thought you were too quiet, too much of a rule follower to ever make waves. Boy, was I wrong. I didn't want to make waves. I just wanted to live in my house without being harassed. But you didn't back down. Most people would have paid the fine and moved on. Most people probably should. I got lucky. If I hadn't documented everything, if I hadn't gotten that video evidence, this could have gone very differently. True. But you did document everything. You were smart about it." Derek raised his bottle. "To standing your ground. To peaceful neighborhoods," I countered. We clinked bottles and drank, watching the sun set over Cascade Heights. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had, with its tidy lawns and well-maintained houses. But something fundamental had changed. There was a sense of relief in the air, as if everyone had been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Tom Richards. "Quinton," it read, "the board has been discussing ways to compensate you for the harassment you endured and the costs you incurred. We'd like to offer you a full refund of 3 years' worth of HOA dues, plus reimbursement for your legal fees, security system, and repairs. It's not much, but it's what we can do within our budget. Additionally, we'd like to formally apologize on behalf of the association for the treatment you received. Let me know if this is acceptable. Best, Tom." I stared at the email for a long moment. The money would be nice, certainly. The security system alone had cost nearly $2,000. But what struck me most was the formal apology. Sharon had never once apologized or acknowledged that she'd done anything wrong. But the association itself was taking responsibility. I replied accepting their offer and thanking them for their integrity. The check arrived 2 weeks later, along with a formal letter of apology signed by all 4 board members. It came to just over $8,000, far more than I'd expected. I used part of the money to take a vacation, my first real vacation in years. I spent a week in Maine, hiking and kayaking and enjoying the summer weather. When I returned to Cascade Heights, I felt genuinely at peace for the first time since moving there. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I became friendly with my neighbors in a way I never had before. The association functioned smoothly under Tom's leadership, handling maintenance issues and community events without drama or power trips. By late autumn, as the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, I found myself actually enjoying living in Cascade Heights. The neighborhood had transformed from a place of constant stress into an actual community. One October evening, the first real cold snap of the season hit Vermont. Temperatures dropped below freezing overnight, and in the morning, I noticed ice beginning to form on my roof again. For a moment, anxiety spiked. Then I remembered that Sharon was gone. The ridiculous rules were gone. The harassment was over. I grabbed my phone anyway and took photos of my roof, documenting the ice formation. Old habits die hard. Then I sent a group email to the HOA board. Just a heads up that we're likely to see ice accumulation on roofs over the next few weeks as we transition into winter. Wanted to give everyone advance notice in case anyone parks on the street near houses with steep roof overhangs. Stay safe, Quinton, Tom replied within an hour. Thanks for the reminder, Quinton. We'll send out a community-wide notice about winter safety precautions. Good thinking. That was it. No threats, no fines, no accusations. Just a reasonable exchange between neighbors. I stood in my driveway, looking at my house with its dark blue siding and white trim, at the neighborhood I'd fought so hard to make livable. The ice on my roof glinted in the morning sun, harmless and temporary. Sometimes, I thought about that first yellow envelope and the chain of events it had set in motion. How a simple fine over naturally occurring ice had escalated into vandalism, arrests, and ultimately, the overthrow of a petty tyrant. I couldn't say I was proud of letting that ice fall on Sharon's Mercedes. It had been calculated and somewhat vindictive, but I also couldn't bring myself to feel guilty about it. She'd received fair warning and had chosen to ignore it. The consequences were her own doing. More importantly, standing up to her had freed not just me but an entire neighborhood from years of arbitrary rule and harassment. Sometimes, the right thing and the petty thing overlap in interesting ways. As winter settled over Vermont, my roof accumulated its usual share of ice and snow. Nobody complained. Nobody sent violation notices. Nobody parked underneath it, and when spring came and the ice melted naturally, sliding off my roof onto empty pavement, I barely noticed. I was too busy planting flowers in my front yard, designing a garden that would bloom throughout the summer. Life in Cascade Heights had become what it should have been all along: peaceful, normal, and blessedly free of HOA drama. The community had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of reasonable leadership and the dangers of allowing petty tyranny to go unchecked. Derek and I still joked about the ice incident sometimes, usually over beers on my porch. It had become neighborhood legend, the story of how an HOA president's car got destroyed by the very violation she'd been trying to fine. "You should write a book," Derek said one evening. "Who'd believe it?" I replied, "Everyone who's ever dealt with a power-mad HOA president, which is about half the country." Maybe he was right. Maybe there was something universal about the experience of fighting bureaucratic overreach, whether it came from a government agency or a neighborhood association. But I was content to leave it as a story told over beers, a cautionary tale about the importance of documentation, the power of standing your ground, and the karmic justice of ice falling on expensive German automobiles. The following spring, the association held a community barbecue, something Sharon had always refused to organize because she thought it was beneath the dignity of Cascade Heights. Tom arranged everything, and the turnout was incredible. I manned one of the grills, flipping burgers while Derek provided running commentary on everyone's cooking technique. Kids played in the park. Adults mingled and laughed. The golden retriever from Sharon's old house charmed everyone by stealing hot dogs when people weren't looking. Mrs. Henderson approached me hesitantly, carrying a plate of cookies. Real cookies this time, not Sharon's terrible sugar-free versions. "I baked these for you," she said, as an apology for taking so long to see Sharon's true colors. I accepted the cookies graciously. "We all see what we want to see sometimes, Mrs. Henderson. No apology necessary." "You're very kind. Sharon called me last week, from Massachusetts." "How is she?" "Bitter. Convinced she was wronged. She's suing her insurance company because they wouldn't cover the damage to her car, claiming it was an act of God." I nearly choked on the cookie I was eating. She's claiming ice falling on her car was an act of God. After initially insisting it was vandalism, yes, the irony seems lost on her. Derek, overhearing this, burst out laughing. "That's perfect, absolutely perfect." Mrs. Henderson smiled sadly. "Sharon was always her own worst enemy. I hope she finds peace someday." "I hope so too," I said and meant it. I didn't wish Sharon ill. I just wished she'd learn from her mistakes and stop making everyone around her miserable. As the barbecue wound down and the sun began to set, I looked around at my neighbors, at the community we were slowly building together. This was what a homeowners association was supposed to be. People working together to maintain and improve their shared spaces, not a vehicle for one person's ego and control issues. Tom raised his beer bottle in a toast. "To Cascade Heights," he called out. "May we never forget the lessons of the past year." "To Cascade Heights," we echoed, glasses and bottles raised in unison. Later that night, alone in my house, I pulled up the security camera footage from the night Sharon had been arrested. I'd watched it a dozen times, but it never got old. The look of shock on her face when the police appeared. The realization that she'd finally gone too far. The handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists. I deleted the footage. I didn't need it anymore. The legal case was closed, Sharon was gone, and holding on to the evidence of her downfall served no purpose, except to feed vindictive feelings I didn't want to nurture. The past was the past. The future of Cascade Heights looked bright. As I prepared for bed, I checked the weather forecast out of habit. Clear skies and mild temperatures for the foreseeable future. No snow, no ice, no drama, just the way I liked it. The story of the ice and the HOA fine became part of neighborhood lore, the tale told to new residents as a warning and a promise. This community had standards, but it also had common sense. We took care of our properties, but we also took care of each other. And we didn't tolerate bullies, no matter what position they held. I never did figure out if letting that ice fall on Sharon's car was the right thing to do. Legally, I was in the clear. Morally, it was a gray area. Practically, it had solved my problem and inadvertently liberated a neighborhood. Sometimes, life gives you lemons. Sometimes, it gives you ice on your roof and an impossible HOA president. What you do with those challenges defines not just your character, but the kind of community you want to live in. I chose to stand my ground, document everything, and let natural consequences play out. Would I do it again? Probably. Would I recommend others do the same? Only with significant caveats about documentation and legal protection. But in the end, the ice melted, spring came, and life went on. Cascade Heights thrived under new leadership. My property values actually increased as word spread that the neighborhood association had become reasonable and fair. And I never received another frivolous violation notice again. That, more than anything else, made the whole ordeal worthwhile. The peace of mind that comes from knowing you can live in your own home without constant harassment and arbitrary fines is priceless. As the first anniversary of the ice incident approached, Derek suggested we have a party to commemorate it. I declined, feeling that celebrating someone else's downfall, even Sharon's, was in poor taste. Instead, I invited the board members over for a quiet dinner. Tom, Patricia, Marcus, and Jennifer came bearing wine and stories about the association's transformation over the past year. "We've had 0 legal complaints," Patricia reported. 0. In a community of 200 homes, that's unprecedented. "People are actually volunteering for committees now," Jennifer added. "We have a wait list for the Architectural Review Board." "A wait list," Marcus raised his glass. "It's amazing what happens when you treat people like rational adults instead of criminals waiting to be caught." "To rational governance," Tom toasted. We drank to that, and to many other things over the course of the evening. By the end of the night, I felt genuinely fortunate to be part of this community and grateful that I'd had the courage to stand up to injustice when it mattered. The ice on my roof that cold January morning had started as a nuisance, become a weapon of sorts, and ultimately transformed into a catalyst for positive change. Not the trajectory I would have predicted, but I'd learned long ago that life rarely goes according to plan. What matters is how you respond when things go sideways. Do you cave to pressure? Do you accept injustice to avoid conflict? Or do you stand your ground, document your case, and trust that truth and reason will eventually prevail? I'd chosen the latter path, and while it had been stressful and occasionally frightening, I had no regrets. My home was truly mine now, free from arbitrary rules and petty tyranny. My neighborhood was a real community, not just a collection of houses under authoritarian rule. And somewhere in Massachusetts, Sharon Pemberton was hopefully learning that power without accountability always ends badly, and that natural consequences have a way of finding those who ignore reasonable warnings. The ice had fallen. Justice had been served, both literally and figuratively. And life in Cascade Heights had never been better. As I locked up for the night and set my security cameras to their usual monitoring mode, I smiled at the irony of it all. Those cameras, installed to protect myself from Sharon's vandalism, now captured nothing more interesting than the occasional delivery driver or wandering cat. It was boring, peaceful, and exactly what I'd wanted all along. Sometimes, the best stories are the ones that end quietly, with everyone simply getting to live their lives without drama or conflict. My story with the HOA had been anything but quiet, but it had ended well. And in the grand scheme of things, that was all that mattered. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect Vermont winter day. I made coffee, checked my email, no violation notices as expected, and started planning my day. Life was good. Life was peaceful. Life was exactly what it should be when you own a home in a well-run community with reasonable leadership and common sense rules. And if winter brought ice to my roof again, I knew exactly what to do. Nothing. Just let it be. Let it melt naturally. Trust that my neighbors would exercise basic caution and common sense. Because that's what people do when you treat them like adults, instead of children needing constant supervision and correction. The HOA had fined me for ice on my roof, and I'd let it slide onto their president's car below. The fallout had changed everything, mostly for the better. Sometimes, the most effective response to petty tyranny is simply allowing natural consequences to play out while protecting yourself legally. It's not a strategy I'd recommend lightly, but in my case, it had worked out better than I could have hoped. The ice had melted. The tyrant had fallen. The community had healed. And I'd learned valuable lessons about standing up for myself, the importance of documentation, and the surprising power of naturally occurring frozen water when applied at the right moment to the right target. Would I do it all again? Ask me on a warm summer day when the memory of that cold January morning has faded. Ask me when ice on roofs is the furthest thing from my mind. But if another yellow envelope ever appears on my doorstep with another ridiculous violation notice inside, at least I'll know what to do. I'll know my rights. I'll know how to protect myself. And I'll know that bullies only have as much power as we give them. Sharon Pemberton had tried to intimidate me with fines and threats. Instead, she'd created her own nemesis, someone willing to stand up to her unreasonable demands and document her subsequent harassment. The ice on my roof had been her downfall, but really, she'd engineered her own destruction. The ice was just the vehicle. Natural forces doing what natural forces do, indifferent to human drama and power struggles. There's a metaphor in there somewhere. about the futility of trying to control natural processes, about how attempting to fine people for acts of nature is as pointless as commanding the tide not to rise. Sharon had learned that lesson the hard way, with crushed metal and shattered glass and ultimately handcuffs and criminal charges. I'd learned a different lesson, that sometimes the right amount of passive resistance combined with impeccable documentation is more effective than any confrontation. And Cascade Heights had learned that good governance requires accountability, transparency, and treating community members with basic respect. Those were lessons worth far more than the original $500 fine, or even the $8,000 settlement I'd received. They were lessons that would shape this community for years to come. As I sat on my porch that morning, coffee in hand, watching my neighbors head off to work and school, I felt profoundly grateful. Not just for the outcome of my battle with Sharon, but for the reminder that ordinary people can stand up to petty tyrants and win. You don't need special powers or extraordinary courage. You just need to know your rights, document everything, and be willing to stand your ground when the situation demands it. The ice had melted long ago, but its impact remained, rippling through the community in ways both obvious and subtle. A better HOA, happier homeowners. A neighborhood that functioned like a community rather than a dictatorship. All because I'd refused to pay an unjust fine for frozen water on my roof. And because Sharon Pemberton had made the fatal mistake of ignoring a clearly stated warning, parking her Mercedes directly in the path of falling ice, and then compounding her errors by engaging in criminal harassment. Justice, in the end, had been served. Not through the courts initially, but through the natural consequences of poor decision-making. The courts had simply formalized what the ice had already made clear. Sharon's reign was over. And now, sitting in the morning sunshine with the smell of coffee and the sound of birds chirping, I could finally, fully appreciate the peace that comes from knowing the battle is won and the war is over. The HOA was no longer my enemy. It was simply an administrative body, managing common areas and enforcing reasonable rules. As it should be, my home was my castle, free from arbitrary violations and vindictive enforcement. And the ice on my roof when it formed each winter was just ice. Nothing more, nothing less. Just frozen water that would melt when the weather warmed, sliding harmlessly off onto empty pavement below, exactly as nature intended.